I was sitting in a rented Toyota outside a diner in Ketchum, Idaho, when Mom's voicemail came through. Calm voice, careful phrasing. I was out of the family business. Not a request, not a conversation, a verdict. I didn't argue. I just texted back, understood. Then I quietly called my broker. 45%. That was my stake in Remick Logging. Our family's pride, their legacy, my burden. 2 days later, I sold it. No fanfare. No notice to my brother. Just ink on paper, a few wire transfers, and a silence that would become deafening. The twist came on the third morning. I woke up to 35 missed calls. Jared was panicking. The new investor had frozen the company accounts and dug up debts my father had buried years ago. And just like that, I wasn't the silent partner anymore. I was the guy who walked away and took the truth with him. The guy who knew where the bodies were buried and let someone else unearth them. Ketchum was a strange place to watch your world implode. Quiet, scenic, too peaceful for what was unraveling. I remember thinking, this town deserves better ghosts than me. At 47, after 2 failed marriages and a near decade of propping up a business built on denial, I finally let it collapse. Not with fury, but with the slow, brutal relief of a man who stopped lying. To them, to himself. Jared left 12 voicemails that day, each one more desperate than the last. Said he didn't understand what I'd done. Said I blindsided him. Said we were supposed to be a team. Funny, coming from the guy who hadn't looked me in the eye since Dad died. See, the thing about family businesses is they don't run on spreadsheets. They run on old wounds, unspoken grudges, and a long tradition of pretending everything's fine. Jared inherited the handshake, the shotgun, and the charm. I got the books. I knew how much debt we were carrying, how many deferred expenses were just holes we shoved our heads into. I've been patching things for years, finessing numbers, negotiating vendor extensions, covering payroll out of my own savings more than once. I did it because I thought I owed it to Dad. But after he passed and Mom started slipping Jared checks under the table again, I realized nothing had changed. Not really. When she called me volatile in her voicemail, that was the word she used. It landed like a slap. Me, volatile? I was the one who kept the roof from caving in. I was the one who stayed sober when Dad drank through harvest. I was the one who showed up. I watched the sun go down behind the sawtooths that night, the sky burning orange like something holy and indifferent. There's a kind of freedom in knowing they never saw you for who you were. Just a role you played. A wallet. A buffer. A scapegoat. And maybe now, finally I'd stop playing. When people talk about betrayal, they make it sound sharp, like a knife in the back, quick and brutal. But the kind that comes from family isn't like that. It's slow. It's quiet. It's forgetting your birthday 3 years in a row, then calling you selfish when you stop reminding them. It's being left off business decisions until something breaks. Then suddenly, you're indispensable again. The week Dad died, Jared gave a eulogy. Big, sweeping words about honor and grit, about the Remick legacy. Everyone said he spoke like a man meant to lead. I stood in the back of the church with a copy of the latest financial report in my coat pocket, the one that showed we'd been insolvent for 8 months. He didn't even look at me when we lowered the casket. I don't think it was grief. I think it was relief. With Dad gone, there was no more buffer between us. Just the truth neither of us wanted to say aloud. Jared got the face and I got the mess. Mom never stepped in. Not when we argued over inventory. Not when he rerouted a timber contract to one of his buddies, costing us 10 grand. Not even when he used the company credit card to take some intern to a ski lodge for client development. She'd shake her head, tell me not to be so harsh. Boys will be boys. After I sold my stake, I drove out to the sawmill one last time. Parked where I always did, under that crooked pine that leaned like it was eavesdropping. No one saw me. They were too busy scrambling. I'd gotten word the accounts were frozen, payroll was delayed, even the insurance premiums had bounced. I watched Jared pacing outside the office trailer, phone to his ear, kicking at gravel like it might answer him. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt something. But all I felt was tired. There was a window, maybe 10 years ago, when we could have done it right. Streamlined operations, modernized the equipment, gone after sustainable contracts. I laid out the plans, ran the numbers, pitched it hard. Jared called it overkill. Said Dad wouldn't want us to mess with tradition. So I became the fixer, quietly propping things up, keeping the lights on while he played foreman on Instagram. And every time I thought about leaving, I'd hear Mom's voice in my head. You know your brother can't handle things like you can. It was meant to be flattery. It became a chain. So yeah, I sold. Not out of revenge. Not even anger. I just got tired of being the net they never thanked when they jumped. And I figured if they wanted to learn how deep the fall really was, well, better late than never. That night in Ketchum, I checked into a cheap motel with stained carpet and a shower that wheezed when it ran. I lay on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and wondered what it would be like to live a life where no one expected you to clean up their mess. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. The day after the accounts were frozen, Jared sent me a text. Just 3 words. What did you do? No punctuación. No greeting. Like I owed him an explanation after everything. I didn't answer. I spent that morning walking through the outskirts of Ketchum, where the pine trees looked like they were holding secrets and the silence was almost too respectful. It reminded me of the land back home in Montana. Not the version they sold on postcards, but the real one. The one with broken fence posts and barns leaning like old men. Beautiful in a way that didn't care if anyone noticed. That's how I felt now. Worn out and finally unafraid to stop pretending. It's funny, the way families act like love and loyalty are the same thing. Like just because you share blood, you're supposed to die on the same hill, even if it's built on sand. But I've been loyal for too long to a story that never included me as more than a background character. Growing up, Jared was the loud one, the fun one. He could screw up and get a handshake. I got the silent treatment for bringing home a B+ in algebra. And when I left for college, a state school I paid for with scholarships and double shifts at the mill, they threw him a going-away barbecue. I got a gas card and a pat on the back. Still, I came back. Every holiday, every crisis, every time the roof leaked or the taxes piled up or someone needed to co-sign a loan. I showed up, because that's what you do, right? You show up, until you don't. And that's what Jared didn't understand. He thought I sold out, that I'd turn my back on the family. But what he never realized, what none of them did, was at the moment they stopped treating me like family, I started treating them like business. And the business wasn't worth saving. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a new investor, Halstead something. Calm, measured voice. Said he appreciated the clean handoff, that my paperwork had been impeccable. Then, almost like an afterthought, he asked if I knew the full extent of the company's liabilities. I did. Of course I did. But I let him keep talking. Turns out Jared had been signing off on short-term loans under the company's name for years. Nothing huge on their own. 15 grand here, 20 there, but they'd snowballed. No records in the main books. Just handwritten IOUs and favors from old friends and small banks. I'd seen them. Had even started a spreadsheet to track them once. I deleted it when I sold. Halstead said he'd be reaching out to the family formally. He thanked me again for the clarity and wished me well. That was it. No anger. No yayment. Just business. And for the first time in my life, I realized that might be the cleanest ending I'd ever get. After Halstead's call, I sat in my car for a long time, engine off, hands in my lap like I was waiting for some invisible gavel to fall. Nothing happened. No thunderclap. No weight lifted. Just the sound of the wind against the windshield and the faint clicking of the cooling engine. I think I expected something more final. Some cinematic closure. But life isn't a movie. It's a rusted hinge that groans open just far enough to let you slip through. That night, I drove east out of Ketchum with no destination. I passed towns I hadn't thought about in years. Arco, where I once spent a drunken weekend with a girl who loved sad songs. Blackfoot, where we used to buy parts for the trucks because the markup back home was brutal. Each exit felt like a version of myself I'd left behind without notice. I stopped in a diner in Pocatello. Same greasy coffee, same tired server with a name tag that said Noreen. She looked like someone who'd seen 1,000 men on the run from something. When she asked what I wanted, I said whatever's hot and doesn't lie to you. She smiled, tired and honest. As I ate, I thought about my father's boots. Old leather things, scuffed and cracked, but he wore them like they made him bulletproof. After he died, Jared took them. Said it was his right as the eldest still living at home. I never argued, but I remembered how they smelled, like oil and pine and years of walking through things no one ever talked about. And I realized something. Those boots never fit Jared. Not really. He wore them for show, to feel like a man who'd earned something. But me? I've been walking barefoot over nails for years, patching holes he didn't even know existed. That's when I knew I wasn't going back. Not just to the business. Not to that version of myself who stayed out of guilt, who kept pretending that holding everything together was the same thing as being part of something. It wasn't. It was just being used. I paid my check, left a good tip, and stood in the parking lot under a yellow streetlight that buzzed like it was trying to remember a song. My phone buzzed too. Another call from Mom. I let it ring out. She didn't leave a message this time. Maybe she was done too. I ended up in Twin Falls by morning, parked outside a closed thrift store with a sign that read we reopen when we feel like it. That felt honest enough. I slept in the car for an hour before finding a gas station with decent coffee and a sink that didn't judge you for looking like yesterday's news. There's a strange sort of clarity that settles in once everything you've built your life around has been pulled out from under you. Not panic, that comes later or not at all, but something quieter, like standing in an empty house after the movers leave and realizing you never liked the color of the walls anyway. I sat in the parking lot with my coffee, staring at the dashboard. The glove box was jammed, and for some reason, that was the thing that undid me. I tugged at it once, twice, then slammed it shut again, the plastic creaking like a sigh. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Just breathe slow. It wasn't about the glove box. It never is. What do you do when you're not who you were anymore? I was the responsible one, the fixer, the guy who showed up in flannel and stayed late and didn't ask for much. I kept the books, paid the late fees, filled in the cracks so they didn't notice the house was falling. That was my identity. And now I was just a man with no address and a phone full of voicemails he wasn't listening to. I thought about calling her Alyssa, the one who'd told me 5 years ago that I had to pick the family or a future with her. I told her I could have both. I was wrong. She lives in Missoula now, or at least she used to, has a bookstore and a dog named Maple. I remember because she hated syrup but loved that dog like it was her child. I almost texted her. Almost. But I knew what that was. Nostalgia dressed up as hope. And I wasn't sure I deserve hope yet. Instead, I looked at the map, not the GPS. A real one, the kind that folds wrong every time you touch it. I traced a line north. I'd never been. That felt like enough of a reason. Before I started the engine, I finally opened the glove box. Inside was an old road atlas, a pen, and a business card from a mechanic named Ray who'd once told me, "You can't fix a thing if it doesn't want to stay fixed." I pocketed the card. Then I drove. The road north out of Twin Falls was empty in a way that made me feel both invisible and seen. Wide stretches of highway with no music, no calls, just the hum of the tires and the occasional wind pulling at the mirrors. I passed fields half dead from winter, snow like a forgotten thought at the edges, and a sky so flat it looked painted on. I stopped in a town called Riggins because I needed gas, and because the sign for pie at the cafe made me pull over like it knew something I didn't. Inside, the air smelled like old grease and cinnamon. The kind of place where the waitress calls you Han, without irony, and pours coffee before you ask. She didn't ask my name, and I didn't offer it. We both knew the dance. She brought me cherry pie, warm, too sweet, and I ate every bite like it was a prayer I didn't realize I needed. That's the thing they don't tell you about walking away. It doesn't feel like freedom. Not at first. It feels like being unmoored, like drifting without a radio signal, hoping the static will turn into a voice again. As I sat in that cafe, I realized something I hadn't admitted until then. I miss no one. Not Jared. Not my mother. Not even the land. I miss the idea of them, sure. The version I built in my head where I was part of something solid, something that meant more than blood and habit. But the real version? The one where I was tolerated for my usefulness and discarded when I asked for dignity? No, that I didn't miss. I paid the check in cash, left too much for a tip, and stepped outside into the cold. A little boy was walking a three-legged dog across the street. The dog hobbled, but didn't look sad, just determined. The kid waved at me like I was someone he recognized. I waved back, unsure why that small act made my throat feel tight. Maybe it was just the air. Maybe it was the first time in weeks I felt like a person instead of a ghost. I got back in the car, turned the key, kept going. Just outside Lewiston, I pulled over at a rest stop I didn't recognize, even though I'd driven this stretch of road a dozen times in my life. Maybe I'd never really seen it. Maybe you only see things clearly when you're not racing towards someone else's fire. I sat on the hood of the car with a sandwich from a vending machine and a bottle of water that tasted like plastic. A couple in their 60s was having a picnic nearby, laughing like they hadn't run out of things to say to each other. I envied them. Not the happiness, the simplicity, the absence of damage. That's when I remembered the voicemail I'd saved. Not Mom's last one, the cold and clipped your being emotional. That one I deleted. This was older. From Dad. He'd left it after a fight I barely recall now. Something about equipment maintenance and money we didn't have. The message was short. His voice tired, worn around the edges. You were right. I just didn't want you to be. I'd save it out of habit, I think. At the time, it felt like the closest thing I'd ever get to an apology. I listened to it twice. It didn't hit like I thought it would. No rush of tears. No resolution. Just a man's voice caught between pride and regret. It reminded me of how much silence there'd been between us in the last years of his life. Not angry silence, worse. Indifferent. I wanted to hate him for that. Sometimes I still do. But mostly, I just mourn the space it created between who we were and who we could have been if someone, anyone, had just said something real. That silence turned into blueprint. Jared followed it to the letter. And I tried to break it by being useful, by being dependable, by being exactly what they needed until I was nothing but the need itself. I watched the sun drop lower through the trees, long shadows spilling across the lot like the arms of something reaching. I knew I could turn around, drive back, call Jared, try to be the one who fixes things one last time. But the idea made my stomach twist, not from guilt, from revulsion, because now I knew the truth. Fixing things had become my way of surviving. And survival isn't the same as living. Somewhere between Grangeville and Coeur d'Alene, the road curved along the edge of a frozen river. I pulled over just to watch it, ice creeping slow along the banks like it wasn't sure it belonged. That's how I felt, like someone still waiting for permission to stop carrying a weight no one else remembered handing me. I hadn't spoken a full sentence to another person in 3 days. It was starting to feel like a kind of detox. No pleasantries, no explanations, just me and the landscape, stripping me down to whatever I still was underneath the fixer, the sun, the partner who always bent first. At a gas station off Route 95, I caught my reflection in the window of the freezer door. Same face, same tired eyes, but there was something different too, like the tension had slid out of my shoulders when I wasn't looking. I bought jerky, a soda, and a map I didn't need, then asked the cashier if there was a motel nearby that didn't charge extra for quiet. She smiled like she understood more than I was saying. I checked in that night and didn't unpack. Just laid on the bed, shoes still on, staring at the ceiling. The room was small, clean, forgettable, the kind that leaves no memory unless something important happens inside it. Nothing did, and that was the point. Sometimes not falling apart is the victory. I picked up my phone. Jared had stopped calling. So had Mom. I scrolled back through the messages. There was one I'd missed, a short text from my cousin Leah, the one who'd left the family farm years ago and never looked back. It said simply, "Took guts. Proud of you." I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade, and yet that one line meant more than any apology I never got from the people I used to break myself for. I didn't respond. Not yet, but I saved it. Because maybe that's what comes next, not repairing the old, but recognizing what was never broken in the first place. I woke up before sunrise. No alarm, no noise. Just that strange kind of peace that comes when you're not rushing to fix someone else's crisis. The kind of silence that isn't empty, just unfamiliar. The motel coffee was weak and tasted like cardboard, but I drank it anyway. There's something about doing simple things, unremarkable things, that makes you feel tethered when everything else has slipped. I sat by the window and watched the parking lot light flicker against the frost on the windshield. No thoughts of the business. No tallying numbers in my head. Just watching breath fog the glass like a kid again. There was freedom in that. Not dramatic, not defiant, just quiet. When I finally packed up, I didn't double-check the drawers. I wasn't planning on returning, and there was nothing in the room worth remembering. I left the key at the front desk, nodded to the clerk, and stepped back into the cold. The road out of town was slick, the kind that makes you drive slow and think slow. I passed a sign for a trailhead and pulled over on instinct. Didn't even check the name. Just parked, grabbed my jacket, and started walking. The trail was thin, mostly ice and old leaves. But there was something honest about the way it didn't try to be anything else. No guardrails, no instructions, just a path. And me, finally choosing to walk somewhere without being pushed. About a mile in, I came across a wooden bench, warped from weather, etched with initials I didn't recognize. I sat, listened. Nothing but trees creaking and wind humming through pine needles like a memory too old to speak out loud. I thought about the voicemail from Dad again. Not the words, the silence after. The way it just ended. How that silence had echoed into everything since. Maybe that was the real inheritance. Not the land, not the company, just the absence, the weight of what was never said. But sitting there, surrounded by everything that didn't expect me to be anything but a man on a bench, I realized I could let that go too. I didn't have to carry it just because it was handed down. I stayed on that bench until my hands went numb. Not out of punishment, just a strange kind of peace in letting the cold touch me without flinching. I wasn't trying to solve anything. I wasn't trying to outrun anything either. I just was. That felt new. Eventually, I walked back down the trail, slow and steady. My knees complained, and I let them. The sky had turned the kind of pale blue that only shows up when winter's almost ready to leave, and the air smelled faintly of pine and something sweeter, maybe thawing earth. Back at the car, I didn't rush. I sat behind the wheel, both hands resting on the wheel like I was about to steer into something that hadn't formed yet. Maybe that's what healing is. Not erasing the past, but making enough space in yourself that the past doesn't take up the whole house. I thought about calling Leah, not to talk about the business, or Jared, or even the text she sent, just to ask what her bookstore smelled like, to hear a voice that remembered me as something more than a ledger or a disappointment. I didn't dial. Not yet. But I would. Eventually. The road ahead was still long, and for once, it didn't scare me. I didn't know what came next. Not really. Maybe a new job. Maybe a city where no one knew my name. Maybe I'd finally learn to cook something more complicated than eggs. Or maybe I'd just keep driving until I found a place that felt like I wasn't a guest in my own life. Either way, I wasn't going back. And that, more than anything, was enough.